Are the stresses of life too much for many citizens in Trinidad and Tobago, whether it might be Petrotrin, TSTT, other job situations that could be in jeopardy, crime, violence, stress, family relationships? Given the economic woes, the crime situation, and the subsets that derive from that, experts are raising concerns over the mental health of the population. While it's an issue not widely talked about because of the stigma attached, some are quietly or maybe openly struggling, but sadly are unable to cope. This could be manifested in many ways, including violence, and with children being one of our more vulnerable groups. We went to spend some time on the issue this morning, and we're joined, not for the first time, by HANIF Benjamin, clinical therapist and clinical traumatologist, CEO and president of the Center for Human Development, a group of companies limited. And even if he might be stressed, from what I understand, because of someone who's been very kind to him, he's not as stressed as he would usually be because of his vehicular situation. Mr. Benjamin, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure,
Tell us about the good news.
Oh Lord, I had a challenge with my compressor, the air condition, and yesterday I went to Joey AC Auto in Southern Riverside, right before Gulf City, and he was able to alleviate some of my stress. So you could imagine in the heat that we're having in a car that is without AC, I may have lost a pound or two. Not that I mind losing a pound or two, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful, Joey. Thank you so much for giving me a short reprieve, if want of a better term.
Why, you expected it to shut down again?
Well, he said I had to change it.
Okay.
That is stressful, but I have some cool air for now, so I thank Joey, Auto in South Riverside there.
And Joey, Riverside in South, you'll get the bill from our marketing department for all the free advertising that you think you just got. So I'll pass and collect the check when next I'm heading down south. But let's get to the issue,
Indeed.
mental health. I mean, the health minister has highlighted it as well. He spoke to the Medical Association at the weekend. First and foremost, I think let's take it step by step if we can, because we want to spend this morning talking about issues of mental health. We'll open up the phone lines in the second hour to give you the chance to offer some perspectives as well. But first of all, a definition. When we talk about mental health, what are we talking about here?
So, first and foremost, I want to say I'm extremely excited by the pronouncement of the Honorable Minister, because this is something, as you know, I have been touting for quite a long time in terms of really how do we treat with mental health in Trinidad and Tobago. More so, as you pointed out, it's very taboo. While it is less taboo than it was 5 years ago, we still have a long ways to go. And a big part of that is if we make mental health prominent, just like physical health. The World Health Organization have said us that there is no health without mental health. And so, Fazir, the first thing I want to do is give you the definition, but also help people to understand that there is a difference between mental health and mental illness. And so we have been using the term interchangeably for some time. And so we need to understand that, mental health is just as health. Physical health, our well-being, our emotional well-being, psychological well-being, that is our mental health. Mental illness, however, is when that mental health has been interrupted. It's on a continuum from good health to ill health. You see? It's either you're well or you're unwell. And so in terms of mental health, if you are unwell, we call that mental illness. You see, you have the flu, you're ill. And so we need to, first of all, understand that. And so when you look at a basic definition of mental illness, it's really about a person who has challenges in dealing with their emotional, psychological well-being. A person whose daily life has been interrupted for some reason that they cannot cope with the normal daily living.
And I'm sure that this is a thing that runs the spectrum, because
Correct.
I mean there are different levels, but I suppose the average person, including myself, might be asking, if somebody's like vexed all the time, or like as in my case, a walking dark cloud, always pessimistic, and you're always down on yourself, is that a sign of mental illness?
Of course. It means that the pendulum has shifted. It means that along the continuum, something changed from mental good health to mental ill health. And somewhere along there, you are dealing with a difficulty that is causing you to be sad all the time, to be angry all the time, to be cynical or pessimistic all the time. That is not where we should be.
Where should okay?
Let me just
go ahead. Go ahead.
Or you happy all the time? Because a lot of persons don't understand that when you talk about, we happy, there's a baseline where you're generally happy. But if a person is constantly happy where everybody else is crying but you're happy, where your emotions are not changing, then we have a problem.
That's what I was going to ask you, Mr. Benjamin. I mean, because I think we need to establish a baseline as to, because you actually preempted my question, so I was going to say, is somebody who is mentally healthy happy all the time?
No. And people, and I know a lot of persons this morning are going to say, but there is a difference. Even happiness happens on a continuum. You see, you are happy or you are euphoric. You see, and people who are in a constant state of euphoria, that high, that is not where your brain should be constantly. Just like you can be sad, but if you start to a point of depression, then we have to deal with that.
Yeah.
So what we need to look at when we talk about mental illnesses are really the spectrums from good to ill. And so no one should be permanently happy or euphoric. No one should be permanently sad or depressed. It means that something is going on that is not regulating your emotions. We go through emotions every day. Sad, happy, angry. Those are emotions. And if you are in a constant state of anger, a constant state of worry, a constant state of panic, then it does something to your chemical in your brain, it does something to your psychological well-being, and then your responses are tied to that. Let me tell you, the way you think is what you will believe, and if you believe it, you will do it. So if you are cynical all the time that the world is a bad and nasty place, and that is what you're thinking, you start to believe that. And therefore your behavior start to manifest the way you think and believe. For example, I may not want to go anywhere, I may not want to come outside, I may not want to engage in worldly things, because that is what you believe. If you believe that, or you think that you are angry all the time, you start to believe that, then your output will be angry. You stroops and hold and slam and draw. And I go, what's going on here? I'm having a normal conversation and you're angry. Or a normal response, for example, if I come to you as a supervisor and I say, hey, what's going on with our report? I really don't find, you're always on me. And then, okay, now this is a normal conversation, and that you have now taken to a different level because what you think and what you believe, and from that is what you do. And so it is important to understand mental health is different to mental illness. You need to understand that everything happens on a continuum, and no one should be in any one state for a prolonged period.
And because we are framing our discussions in the context of the family as well, and the breakdown of family life, how do we deal with that in the family circle? Is it, because sometimes it says that the worst thing is to have your own family diagnose you, because they know you too well, and they may say, well, he just just miserable and all that sort of thing. Should you be getting outside help, outside assistance?
Yes, I mean, definitely. Yeah. That's the third piece. But the first part of what you're talking about is critical. I am not saying for family to diagnose you, but I am hoping that probably at the end of this show, you will be able to recognize signs and symptoms to know that something is in fact wrong, or something is moving along the continuum that requires a different level of conversation or a different level of intervention. You see, because before you get an intervention, you must recognize. And before you recognize, you must observe. So I want family members to be able to observe that something is in fact moving, and if it is moving, to what degree, intensity, frequency, you see? And from that, you will determine whether or not an intervention is necessary.
But what do you do if somebody don't want to talk? If you say, well, son, you're looking a little down and so on, cool, leave me alone.
And you will get that. And what you're talking about there is you'll get it a lot in probably the adolescent stage and or men, right? They all, we are always not willing to determine, even for physical health, we wait until you're falling down to seek help. And it's the same thing for mental illness, more so mental illness. So you will find that a lot in adolescence. But the important thing is that you don't give up. You cannot give up. And that is the problem with a lot of families. We see signs, we know signs, and for whatever reason, we give up. And I'm saying this morning that if we give up, we are allowing the continuum to continue to move in the area of ill health, you see, and now we reach a point where you require different levels of intervention. And so even if somebody in your family is saying, you know, are good, you must know now how to provide that support around that person. What you can do to help that person in your family to manage whatever is going on. Because I'll be very honest with you, a lot of times people don't know that something is wrong, and if they know something is wrong, they cannot identify what this is. And because of that, they just...
Well, you hear a lot of people saying, I mean, yes, I think most of us can... You're just feeling for some reason, you're either angry all the time, or you're just upset about something, and you know, you want to get out of it, but you don't know how to get out of it.
And you're quite right. And that is where a lot of times education is important. And that is why I'm so excited about this show, because there's none like it in Trinidad that help people to understand signs, symptoms, and seek help, right? Whether that help is just knowing, you see? And that, you know, knowing is so important.
Yeah.
A parent who knows that something is wrong with their child, a lot of times, and I say this, when I have to diagnose, or one of my clinicians diagnose somebody with a mental illness in the late teens, it hurts me, you know. It hurts me because a child had to live an entire childhood struggling when you could have gotten help early. And most time it's because of two things. You don't know, or if you know, you are afraid of what it means to you and or your family. So you're talking about shame, stigma, and of course, you know, stigma is a big one.
No, but is that still a big, and I know I constantly interrupt you on this one. I don't intend to throw you off here. Just remember the points that you're raising. But how much of a, because we had the health minister raise the issue as well, talking about more citizens will start losing it, talking about 1 in 4 suffering with different experiences and so on. How much of a stigma is it still? How is it still very much a stigma to say, well, look, you know, maybe I need some counseling, maybe I need to talk to somebody? How much of a stigma is it still in Trinidad and Tobago?
I can tell you, I've been here for 6 years, and it has moved significantly. The stigma of mental illness have moved significantly. You have people talking about mental illness who ordinarily would not have spoken about it. You have people reaching out who ordinarily would not have reached out for help. You have the Psychological Association, the Psychiatric Association, though I think they can do a whole lot more. They have been doing stuff in the last couple of years. And I think under Dr. Naked and team, and then Varma, who is now an independent senator, they have really been pushing the agenda of mental illness. So much so that it is in, you know, joint select committees, it is in Parliament, and now the minister is speaking about it at this level. The conferences that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, it speaks to us moving the pendulum from really taboo and sad to a different place. But we have a whole lot more to do. We have a long way to go still. But for Zira, I can say to you as a practitioner, I have seen the movement, and I commend the people who are within the system who are helping push that. You see, because I'm going to agree with you, and you have always heard me say it. I think Trinidad and Tobago is a traumatized society. We are highly stressed, and we are quite volatile. And if we don't get our mental health and reduce mental illness right and seek treatment, we're going to end up in a very dark place, right? And we see it by the number of persons on the street. When you drive the East-West corridor, it pains me to see how many young persons are mentally ill walking the streets. You see?
Can you identify somebody as mentally ill walking the streets?
Of course. You see the signs, you see, I mean, first you shouldn't be walking in the middle of the street and shooting at cars with your finger, Fazir.
Oh, you mean that sort of obvious sort of thing? I understand.
Very obvious.
Yeah.
And I want to make a point when it comes to that, because a lot of us have, you know, we are thinking that mental illness is that the madman. You understand?
Yeah.
And I want people to understand that is the furthest end of the spectrum. That is where people will end up if we don't treat with it.
That's the point I was going to make, Mr. Benjamin, in the sense that right now, maybe somebody listening on the radio and somebody sitting on a bus with 50 people on the bus, how many of those people may be mentally unwell? Not that they're mad, as in doing what you say, walk out in the middle of the road and do stupidness and so on, but that they are troubled, they are deeply troubled by something, and they just are finding it difficult to even reconcile their own feelings, and as a result of that, they are creating difficulties for themselves, for their families, and so on. From your own experience, is it a worsening situation in Trinidad and Tobago that needs a much more serious intervention at all levels?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I think because of the other stressors. You see, let me tell you, a person could be susceptible to mental illness because of hereditary factors and all these things. But you're normal, you're okay. Let me not say normal, you're okay.
Yeah.
You're going to work, you engage, you're not overly bothered. However, when a stressor enters the environment, it pushes you over the edge. You see, and now you begin to suffer, you begin to be isolated, you start to be worried and panic and frustrated and all these things, and you see no end. You see, and that is increasing because the state of the country, the state of the world, in fact, is very volatile. It is very, difficult. And so a lot of persons are now moving from the comfort zone that they were in into a very agitated zone. And if you are in an agitated zone for too long, you begin to respond. You remember I tell you, if you think it, you believe it, you do it.
Right.
And so you will find the behaviors of persons starting to change over time because now they're in an agitated zone. And or what we call, revving. And not everyone can manage in a revving zone. If a car is revving too long, it's overheat.
Yes.
You understand? And then you have to attend to it. You see? And so, like us, when we move from normal regulated self into a revving state, you see, things start to happen. Stress factors are increased, blood pressure. So all the physiological and physical health issues start coming to the fore. And because you don't know what's really going on, you go to the doctor every Monday morning for eye tests, blood tests, foot tests, and you're spending thousands of dollars, and they say, well, I see nothing wrong with you. At that point, the doctor should be writing a letter for you to go see a psychologist, a clinician, or something like that. But the fact is, Fazir, that we are at that place. And so the person who is sitting to your left or to your right might be dealing with a level of stressor right now that they cannot control.
We have to take a break. Well, don't rev the engine too much. And maybe that's why his compressor went bad and the AC had to give trouble. Maybe he's revving the engine a bit too much. But we're talking about a serious issue, mental health, mental illness, general well-being in Trinidad and Tobago. Don't forget, during the course of the second hour of our discussion with HANIF Benjamin, we'll have a brief period to take your calls where you could offer some perspectives. And if we do give you that opportunity, please stick to the topic, stay on point, because we want to take advantage of that opportunity with Mr. Benjamin in studio with us again in our Family Focus segment on a Wednesday. We'll be back right after this. Let's talk about now signs. What are we looking for in the different categories?
And so mental illness or the change in the continuum, as I would like to keep the theme, really, when you look at the different categories, you're talking about adults, young adult, adolescent, and younger children, it manifests differently. And so what an adult might manifest may be very different to what a 5 or 10-year-old will manifest. Some of the common diagnoses we see around, you're talking about depression, anxiety. As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization have said 4 in 5 person would experience depression at some point in their life, and so when you're talking about that, it's a pretty high number. Bipolar, when you're talking about bipolar, some of the mania, the highs and the lows, and of course schizophrenia, and all the other types of illnesses. But those are some of the common diagnoses we see in Trinidad and Tobago. In children, of course, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And again, I want to specify that it can either be the inattentiveness, the hyperactivity, or a combination of the two. So you have to know which one they're dealing with and what type of treatment to deal with whatever they're dealing with. You're also talking about dual diagnoses, a person who might have more than 2 diagnoses, whether it is substance abuse and mental illness. Of course, you have to determine which one came first, whether the mental illness was brought on by the substance abuse or the substance abuse came,
Yes.
So those are some of the common areas. But in terms of adults or young adults, what are we looking for? Confused thinking. Right? You go into a state of confusion. Everything confuses you. The normal, simple things are very confusing to you. Prolonged period of sadness and or irritability. So you're always, like we were talking about, you're always irritable. Everything gets you annoyed, right? That shouldn't be a normal place to be, right? Feeling extremes, highs and lows, extreme. Highs, you're bouncing all over the place. Lows, you flat on your bed. You refuse to come outside, right? Those are going to be important things. Excessive fear, worry, and anxiety. Again, the cynicism, the world, everything is bad. I can't leave my house. Those are the kind of things that you're looking for. Social withdrawal is very important. Right? A person who have been very engaged in society, engaged in family, now you no longer want to go to family events, you no longer want to go to work events, you no longer want to hang out or chill, whatever one, with people that you know, right? Dramatic changes in eating and sleeping, that's a common one as well. And I always ask parents to be on the lookout for that. It's either eating too much, eating too little, sleeping too much, sleeping too little. And again, all of these things are from a baseline perspective, right? So if your baseline was eating little and you're eating less, you see, or you're eating more than what you used to eat. So you're really looking at the baseline, where the person was when they were at a regulated state.
Yeah, and of course, the point that you're making there, just very quickly, if I could intervene, the baseline is not necessarily the same for everybody.
Definitely.
And that is something we need to be careful of as well. You can't say, well, I know this one is do this all the time, I consider that normal, but you doing something differently, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have any mental, it could be that you just operate from a different level.
Correct. And so you need to understand the person's baseline, and in understanding that, you're understanding their normal, right? And we do that a lot in families, and that is why we have a lot of challenges in family. But your sister don't do that, your brother don't do that, So you find now that there's that added pressure, because now you are thinking that all of us should have the same baseline. And that is why, even as a clinician, when a family comes in to us for treatment, we don't treat everyone the same. It's a common issue, but that issue is experienced as an individual within a family. So we examine the individuals within the family, how they see, perceive, and is living that experience, and then come up with a treatment to deal with that as a whole. You see? Because if I come and I'm taking one brush and I just passing it across, and you're 1 foot tall and you're 10, chances are you might get touched and the other one may not. So the person and the individual understanding of the situation.
How difficult is that in the family situation? Because I know we want to touch on some of the other important signs for the different categories as well, but how difficult is it in a family structure where, as you say, the broad brush kind of thing, well, your brother does do that, where's your problem? Or your sister used to do this so good, why you can't do it too? That kind of thing. How difficult is it in a family structure for the parents, especially in situations that we find more and more the families are disjointed, are broken up, different situations, parents not at home, maybe grandparents taking care of the children as well. How difficult is it for the adults to help children who might have their own issues and challenges and not use the broad brush for everybody?
It is very difficult. It is very difficult, especially when you come from a place of not knowing. You see, and that is why it is important for us to educate people. Because here it is that one family member might be dealing with a difficulty, and that difficulty is not understood, right? And then that person is now compared to others within the same family. So you're talking about isolation, withdrawal, shame, and all of those things. And so you find that a person who is now being compared might withdraw how they actually feel. They don't want to express what's going on with them because they think that they'll be judged. And because of that, they are continuing to live with the difficulty. And while they continue to live with the difficulty, it continues on the negative side of the continuum. You see? So it's quite difficult. And then, the family may want to treat with them like they're treated with everyone else. And I'm saying you cannot. Imagine you have 3 children in your home, 17 years, 15, and 10. That is 3 different treatments. 3 different, because the 17-year-old treatment is very different when he was 5 back then. And the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old is quite different now. They understand things differently. They see things through a different lens. And so you need to understand, one, the adolescent development, where they are, and what are their milestones, whether or not their milestones were achieved the way it should have been achieved, and treat them from that perspective. But from the time you start to do broad brushing, you are actually hurting your children more than you are helping. As a matter of fact, we always look at the one who is being compared, but the one who did well is also under pressure to keep doing well and not disappoint, because everybody looks up as I am the example to be. And so it puts an additional pressure on that person to keep doing well. And you know, I always put it as the slouching mentality. You know, so you're in pain now because you have to keep the back straight, and you don't want to go down a little bit, because if you go down now, you know. And so parents need to be so careful about how they treat with children who are dealing with difficulties in the home. You see?
All right, let's move along. As far as, because we're heading up towards 7 o'clock, we want to continue the discussion as well, but we want to cover as much ground as we can before we open up the phone
So let me
lines.
just real strictly, strong feeling of anger, and again, this is for the adults and young adult category. You know, seeing or hearing things, hallucination, right? Or inability to cope with daily living situation, right? Suicidality or suicidal thoughts. You're talking about also delusion, strange thoughts coming into your mind. So those are some of the things that you could look out for your adults. When you talk about, you know, in late adolescent type of thing, what we spoke about prior, however, I'm going to add defiance of authority, truancy, theft, and vandalism as well. So sometimes we see children behaving in a particular manner in the schools, and I really want the Minister of Education and Health to understand that mental health is real in the school system, and we need to recognize it and treat it there as well, as early as primary school. Don't wait till secondary school. So you're talking about a behavior defiant, and so a person might be diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder because of this kind of behavior. A prolonged negative mood. Now, naturally, adolescent is a very moody, tipsy-turvy place. So you have to now be able to discern whether this mood is baseline. You see, we go back to the baseline. Or this mood is something more than the baseline. You see, and that is going to be critical. How do you know that? By observation. You need to observe your children. You need to observe their mood. You need to know what is a normal, miserable day for your teenage daughter or son. And you need to know when something drastic has happened beyond that, or something is moving. You see? So you're talking about poor eating again. Young people like to eat, especially males. So you're talking about, again, sleep and eating. Whether you're sleeping too much, eating too little, those are the kind of things you want to look out for. And again, for adolescents, frequent outbursts of anger. They respond in anger, right? Anything. You know, wash your way anger. Do your homework anger. Everything is just anger. In younger children, we're talking about changing school pattern and school performance, right? That is very much clearer for us to see in younger children. Poor grades, you move from high grades to low grades, and there's very little understanding as to why that is. So you want to understand that change. Again, changing sleeping or eating, regressive behavior. And when I speak about regressive, I'm talking about you stop wetting bed, and now you're going back to a place of wetting bed, right? You were potty trained and you're doing well, now you're going back to a place where you need help. And so you want to look at those regressive behavior. Or you have been sleeping in a room without a nightlight, or maybe now you want all the lights on, or you want to come sleep with mommy and daddy again, right, when you were doing fine all along. So those are some of the regressive behavior you want to look at, right? You're talking about eating again, change in eating pattern, refusing to go to school, refusing to go to bed. Those are critical things to look out for. Persistent nightmares and night terrors, those are important things that you want to look out for.
So lots of issues there. And before we pause at 7 o'clock, and we'll continue the discussion right after the break at 7 o'clock. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Benjamin, but it seems that in almost all of these cases, fundamentally, because we're focusing on the family, it depends on you knowing
Correct.
the individual, knowing them to the extent where you're not prejudging or misjudging or broad brushing, but you know them well enough that you understand where that baseline is, and you can also tell when that person is deviating from the baseline and when you need to intervene. So it really comes down to knowing that individual.
Correct. And so I have here, family life. That is really what it is. Understanding your family, understanding who makes up your family and what moves them, what gets them angry, what makes them happy. We need to know that. And you made the point earlier about, people busy working. But I am talking about in our normal daily interaction with our children. If we take time to just observe, if we take time to just be with, you will know the baseline of your children. You will know, and let me tell you something, our children know the baseline of their parents, because they can tell when is a young child and mom is going through a difficulty, that child come and sits to your foot, they come and they play with you, they are more empathetic towards you because they sense that there is some change in your mood or behavior or emotion. And so they are feeding that. They know when things are wrong at home. That's why I always say, this is nonsense, but we can't tell the children they're too young. That has to cut. We need age-appropriate conversation because they figure it out because of your same baseline.
They probably know us better than we know ourselves in some respect.
Indeed.
Well, it's right on the dot at 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's take a quick break and then we'll return to our discussion with HANIF Benjamin. And later on in that discussion in the second hour, we'll spare some time for your phone calls. We'll be right back. Let's speed up our discussion with the AC working in Mr. Benjamin's car. He's therefore not be able to speed up and stay within the speed limit in our discussion because he is here with us to talk about issues related to mental health, mental illness in the context of the family, hence our family focus series. And just to give you the format as to how we're going now, because some of you might already be lined up wanting to call, we'll develop a few points with Mr. Benjamin, then we'll take a break and then define a segment for your calls. And then after that, after taking your calls, we'll take another break, and then Mr. Benjamin will wrap up by responding to some of your questions or your observations. So if you want to just bear with us, we'll take your calls in a short while. And indeed, if you want, feel free to take notes because some of the points that are being made will certainly be very valid, indeed in our earlier discussion as well, with the information that we've been given already. So let's talk, Mr. Benjamin, now as to how this affects the family, mental health, mental illness, and the breakdown of the family structure. Let's talk about that.
So mental illness, as we have been pointing out, can be, debilitating to a person, manageable. The difference, however, is medication, treatment, family understanding, psychoeducational support, those things. However, our families have a difficulty in managing mental illness. One, because of knowledge. They don't understand the symptomatologies or the symptoms of the diagnoses. In some cases, Fazir, there's no diagnoses. They're just living with a difficulty and we're not really sure. Right? And we also have the spirituality side of this. Somebody do them, or, we always get that ever so often. Something happened spiritual along the way that caused this person or is causing a family member to be in this way. A lot of times, when we see the man and the woman on the street, Fazir, it's mainly because of our inability to cope or manage with the change. When this happens, just like a terminal illness enters a family, a serious medical diagnosis enters a family, it affects everyone. When you talk about Yuri Brennan, the ecological model that surrounds a person, that is what we're talking about. It affects everything within that ecological model, the environment, right? So you're talking about if something happens to a breadwinner, and that person is no longer able to provide, the economic of the family changes, the dynamics of the family change. You see, a person from able body to non-able body, meaning now you're incapacitated in some way, wheelchair, bedridden, those are things that change. So too is mental illness. When mental illness steps in and you have the symptoms, for example, your highs and your lows and your mania and stuff like that, it affects everyone. And for you, a lot of times it's because, one, we don't understand what they're dealing with. Two, access to treatment, whether or not you accessed it yourself or in trying to access it, you cannot get the help that you are seeking. That too creates problems for family, because now you're talking about taking time off from work, having to go, and so the support is critical for a person living with mental illness. Unfortunately, because we don't understand again, you give up. We give up, I can't handle this. And most times in families you find one or two persons as the soldiers, and everyone takes a hands-off approach. You see me, I can't deal with this. Treatment might be expensive, medication might be expensive if you can't get it. You can't go long or often without it. So what happens? The person, because of the mental illness, now takes to the streets. And because they take to the street because of the mental illness and the need for medication, you self-medicate. And what you use for self-medication? Substances. Yeah. And that is why we see what we see. And so the breakdown of family life is real. For example, one child might be dealing with serious mental illness and you have 3 others. The time, and it's just like physical health, you know. The time you now have to take to deal with this one child takes away from the time you have to deal with the other children. And so the other children might feel left out, especially if they don't understand that person X is dealing and requires a certain level of attention. And or the parent becomes guilty, or they feel guilty now for neglect. You also have challenges with husband and wife or partners, because now all your time is consumed in dealing with the ill person. And so the family in itself begins to deteriorate. And so what you see is concentration on one person, and because of that pressure, you might now fall back because the rest of the family is deteriorating. And you're in the middle and you're not sure what to do or which direction to go.
You know, there are so many issues that come into the discussion when we talk about issues related to health and wellness and mental issues and family circle and so on. But how difficult is it to, I mean, is it a dangerous thing to do self-diagnosis, to say, well, you know, the way I am is because of what happened to me as a child. The way I am is because how my family is, how I grew up that way, and it's just the way it is. And you know, there's nothing I could do about it. How much of a problem is that, if it is a problem at all? Because some people might say, look, I mean, I don't really have time for all this fancy diagnosis and all this scientific tralala. I mean, I just have to cope, and my father coped, my grandfather coped, my great-grandfather coped, and I ain't dead yet. So, I mean, we just have to make do.
How they cope is important. And I tell people that all the time. You see, we have a lifespan, and you can cope miserably, or you can cope well. And so you determine what level of coping you want to be. Because I tell people all the time, while I understand daddy was so, grandpa was so, and all these things so, how did they cope? And how are you faring now? Because there is help. You can be helped. And so you remaining in a state of, well, it is what it is, or pessimism as we would call it, or pessimistic or cynicism, means that your quality of life is less than. And why do we want to have a less than quality of life when we can in fact have a better quality of life? You see, the point you talk about self-diagnosis, I call it insight, and insight is 2020. I am not saying for you to go on WebMD, like most of us, and then start, you know. It is important to go on WebMD to see, okay, I am experiencing X, Y, and Z, and WebMD is saying if you're experiencing X, Y, and Z, then what do you do with that information becomes critical. I don't want you now to go in a medicine cabinet and start to look for medication and or go and start to boil bush or this because the doctor did WebMD.
Or go to a CMN.
Correct, and those things happen. So what I'm saying is insight is important, because the greatest asset as a clinician is for you to come as a client with insight. Because it means that I could move straight into treatment. Now, if you come to me and I now have to help you to understand what is, it takes a longer time. But if you have insight, like, listen, I went to WebMD, I have been experiencing this, sweaty palms, palpitation of the heart, I can't concentrate, so I know something is wrong.
Based on interaction with your clients, because one of the challenges we have in Trinidad and Tobago is data, hard data based on research and so on, but based on interaction with your clients, how many individuals have a good understanding of where they have that level of insight?
Less than 20%. less than 20%. Because we are very data-driven at the Center for Human Development. Everything we turn into data, because I think the more we understand people, the more we'll be able to sharpen our tools to help families and people who come. And the insight is poor. Most time people are coming for serious because your wife called us to tell us that you need therapy. And so we have to say to your wife, don't bring Fazir here unless Fazir know he coming here, because we will not be treating Fazir. And people do that. I call because my son, and I thinking you're talking about a child. How old is his son? 45. I say, well, all right now, you need to tell your son what's going on. You see, or turn us into a family session, but because insight is poor.
Because some people might say, she think I want help, but she need help.
Most times for you, that might be a conjoined or co-joined type of help needed, because we respond to you in a particular way that causes us to probably not be our best. And so when we meet with people, you recognize that is not just the identified client that requires the help, but everyone that circles the client requires the help. You know, the ugly duckling kind of situation. Everybody points, oh, he's the troublemaker. But when you really sit and examine the family, the entire family requires some form of help, whether that help is in itself just psychoeducation.
We'll take a break. Coming up towards 7:14 in Trinidad and Tobago. So if you are inclined to call in, this is your opportunity now. Let's take that break. We'll take your calls, as we said. Don't expect an immediate response from Mr. Benjamin. We'll hear what you have to say, maybe some observations, some point you'd like to raise. We'll take note of it. Then we'll go to a break and you'll have the chance to respond to some of your observations and your questions if necessary before we wrap up our session this morning. We'll be back right after the break with your calls. Thank you for obeying our request for you to participate via the phone calls, and let's leave it now to Mr. Benjamin in the few minutes that we have available to respond to some of the queries, some of the observations. Maybe the last one first, the caller from Lavender.
Yes, I think I want to address that first, because Mom, what is going on here is that, again, there was a move in the baseline, and I'm very excited that Mom has recognized that. But what Mom fell into is a lot of times we become very punitive in their behavior, in the change in the baseline. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to become punitive to the point where you have now pushed or is pushing the person to no longer want to be engaged. You see, I think it's important for you to call us 235-5181 to really come in for us to kind of help you to understand what's going on and to take a look at the young man as well and to see how we can help you. But definitely there have been a change in the baseline, and how you respond is going to be critical. Now, the reason why I wanted to start with that first is because that is how it happens most times. When there's a change in the baseline and mental illness or some form of difficulty steps in, the first reaction is disappointment, despair, shame, and guilt. And because of those things, if we don't manage it well, we are in fact pushing our family member away as opposed to bringing them in from an empathetic perspective. So that is going to be critical.
Let's talk about San Juan, who is the issue where he has identified the fact that he said that he suffers with mental illness. There are others in the family who suffer with mental illness. Could that be a problem if they were to have children and relationship involvement?
I don't see it as a problem, but I cannot tell you, again, I don't know that if it may be passed on and to what degree, but there's a possibility. But I can also say that you can also treat with it when it comes. I wouldn't tell someone, to not have a family, because there's the likelihood, because mental illness can be hereditary, it can be environmental, so you can go your entire life without experiencing ill health. Right, and if ill health comes along, you treat with it, right? But I would not continue a family because of that.
And yes, go ahead. Yeah.
And when you talk about somebody, talk about treatment.
Yes.
There are two types of treatment. There are acute care, and you can get acute care. I tell people, go to your emergency room. Right, there are psychiatrists on staff. There are doctors who can help you there. Right, so please, if you're experiencing mental illness, mania, or whatever it is, go to emergency care, and it starts there. They will give you a referral to your outpatient clinic and stuff thereafter. I would like to see outpatient clinic in every district in Trinidad and Tobago. As a matter of fact, I would like to see at every health center, just like the doctor, the nurses come to work, you have a psychologist, a social worker, and a psychiatrist. Maybe a psychiatrist can rove between different, but that is a recommendation that I have been pushing forever. We have enough psychologists, social workers to be staffed at every health center throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And I think it is time for us to get them there so that persons can get help. Now, of course, persons talk about going privately, which is also an option. I mean, we have the two systems.
Yeah.
But we need a system for a person who cannot come to see me, but they need help. We should make mental health treatment very much available like physical health, you see? And so my recommendation is really towards community. And the woman who spoke about ADHD and the medication,
yes,
that is also a major problem. We take our heart medication, we take medication for hypertension, for the foot and the liver, but we have a problem taking psychotropic medication. There is nothing wrong with psychotropic medication. However, you need to be vigilant and you need to be engaged in therapy. At the Center for Human Development, we don't believe in just medicating people and leaving them. It must work in tandem with therapy. We teach you coping mechanism so that you could reduce the dependence on the medication. And so we work closely with our consultant psychiatrists because it is not just about medication. However, medication is quite important because mental illness is a disease of the mind. You see, and the mind chemicals need sometimes to be settled, your mood needs to be stabilized. So mom, there's nothing wrong with the medication. However, you must be very knowledgeable. Medication management is important. Understand the medication, and that is why you need a therapist or a clinician to help you to understand what's going on there. Yeah?
And before we conclude, because we're just about time for us to wrap up, Mr. Benjamin, and as usual, we always appreciate your presence. Just to give the numbers once again for Mr. Benjamin, 235-5181, 374-9974, 317-3471. You can reach them as well as livelifewelltt.org for more information as well. And in the few seconds that we have available, what is your final bit of advice to Trinidad and Tobago?
Accept the feelings. If you're feeling different, accept that something is different, right? Handle unusual behavior, meaning don't allow it to fester. Know that this behavior is unusual, accept it, and seek help. Seek help. Seek help in any form, whether it is through your church, through your general doctor, through psychologists, but seek help. Do not suffer. And above all, you are not alone. A lot of times persons living with mental illness think that this is only happening to them. You are part of a wider network of persons also living with mental illness, and it is important to find them and to become a community so that you can get the help. But above all, family need to understand that the support they give to one another will be the greatest healer of mental illness.
HANIF Benjamin, thank you very much as always for taking the time to join us this morning. Clinical therapist and clinical traumatologist, CEO and president of the Center for Human Development Group of Companies Limited. And indeed, hopefully you'd have found this session to be very informative, very enlightening, and maybe just moving the discussion forward even more as far as being able to discuss these things and deal with these things in a much more forthright manner for the sake of ourselves and the sake of our families and indeed the health of the nation. At 7:35, we'll take a break and continue right after that.